I just want to hear some applause from anyone for whom this is not their first Andrea Nguyen cookbook rodeo. Yeah, same. I've got like maybe 3, 4 of your cookbooks at home. It's just essential.
That's amazing. Because I never thought in my career, in my lifetime, I would go beyond the one book, the first one.
And what number is this one?
This is book baby number 7.
Nice. You have as many book babies as my grandma has, like baby babies.
You know what? I don't have babies, like live ones, because I think that that's probably like the hardest job ever in life. But birthing books, I'm all right. It's hard. But once that it's out in the world, out in the wild, you let it grow, see what happens to it in people's home kitchens, and then you get ideas for a new one, and you go at it again.
So for Evergreen Vietnamese, what is the 101? Since I'm guessing no one has had the time to read it in the 10 minutes since they picked it up.
Here's the lowdown. It's not a completely vegan or vegetarian cookbook. It is plant-based. And it's plant-based in the sense that I'm taking a look at what plant-based means in Vietnamese foodways and culture. And we've always been a plant-based society, agrarian society. And when my family came to the United States, unbeknownst to me, we started eating a lot of meat. And over the years, I realized it was unhealthy for me. When I turned 50, I was like, I am not doing well. And I started cooking with more plants and twisting things, because, we can alter our diets and try to be healthy, and there are a lot of prescriptions out there. And a lot of them have to do with diets that aren't really culturally appropriate. You know what I mean? Like Mediterranean diets, and sometimes now the Mediterranean diet says, oh, we're going to include tofu too. And I'm like, tofu's an Asian food for 2,000 years, and so why can't we talk about what's appropriate for Asian cuisines? And so at the end of it all, when I started really rejiggering my diet, I realized that I was returning to my food roots. And there are a lot of enduring ideas in this book. They're evergreen ideas, so that are also very good for your health as well as our planet. So that's the title. But that's not the 101, but I mean, sort of.
So I want to go into the idea that so this spring, there are tons of plant-based, plant-forward, vegetarian, all the words, cookbooks coming out, and yours is one of them. Is it a trend? How do you see yourself within that context?
I had no idea it was a trend. Seriously, because I started this project in 2019, and when I had this health scare. And what I did was I thought, okay, I'm gonna go into my kitchen and just start trying to figure out how to really put plants at the center of our plates. We talk a lot. We amen a lot to this idea of let's push proteins to the edge and bring plants to the center of our plates. Let's eat in moderation, and we amen that a lot, but few people tell you how to do it. And once I figured that, this is really fun, because vegetables have personalities, I was like, let's just focus on a book that was low meat and plant-led and plant-forward and plant-based, but on Vietnamese terms. Because you hate being boxed in, right?
Yes. You got me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I thought, I want to write this book that allows people to understand Vietnamese food, but with a really big plant focus and letting plants speak first.
So there's a really interesting, difference that you're articulating here, where the book feels different from let's start vegan or vegetarian and then adapt Vietnamese food. And your lens is let's start with Vietnamese food and just go more towards the plants. Does it feel tell me about that. Is that a meaningful difference?
It is. It's not dogmatic. I am not Buddhist. I am Catholic. And I don't think that it works to tell people to eat vegan or vegetarian because I'm a rule breaker. I don't know about you guys. And I'm not a virtuous eater or virtuous cook, but I do want to figure out how to eat healthily. But on all of that said, it's just like a creative thing that I want people to like get into their kitchens and take a look at this one cuisine and figure out how you can really explore and exploit plants. And then once you start doing that, it's like really fun. Because there's this whole thing about food and where when you start taking a look at books that are plant-based, it is like this religious thing. But I think we're moving away from that now because the pandemic has taught us that vegetables deserve love and people love them, and vegetables deserve to be loved more than by everyone, not just vegans.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, also to speak to the moment that we're in, do you think you would have been able to publish this book when you started?
No, because this is like they're full of hacks in this book. You're going to, for example, see rice paper done, treated and manipulated in ways that I never knew about back when I published my first book in 2006. And for example, the recipe on the cover of the book is for bánh cuốn, which is like Cantonese chong fun, but except Vietnamese bánh cuốn is a lot thinner. And when we came to the United States, there was this hack that circulated among Vietnamese refugees who were fleeing Vietnam, and it was like, come to America, and you can still make bánh cuốn at home using swan's down cake flour and an 8-inch nonstick skillet. And this was something that's widely circulated to people before they left the country, and they're like, oh, I can come to America and still have my bánh cuốn. I'll be okay. And so that was the hack in 1975, and that was the hack for many years. And when I wrote my first book, I was like, these are supposed to be rice sheets, and why are we using cake flour? So I made a recipe using rice flour. But then, and that was in 2006. But 17 years later, there's a new hack that's circulating, not within the Vietnamese diaspora, but in Vietnam. And that is the difference, is that, I'm like looking at trends and I'm looking what's going on out there. It's like, people are like, you know what? It's really hard to make bánh cuốn the old school way, and we don't have nonstick skillets all the time, but what we can do is over-soak rice paper, fill them, and then steam them or nuke them, and we have bánh cuốn, and it's like, that's the difference. It's like now it's not so much about Vietnamese refugees and the diaspora, but it's also this transnational movement of people and ideas.
I think that's something we miss a lot when we have diasporic cookbooks and sort of cultural work, is that we don't look back at what people are doing now. So much of Vietnamese food is very nostalgic, right? And in so doing, sometimes we encourage gatekeeping in a way that like prohibits that sort of flexibility. And so I wondered then, like, what else have you learned from Vietnam?
Well, that I don't know much. I mean, you recently went to Vietnam on a project. Soleil's working on a cookbook project with a Bay Area chef, David Phu. And whenever I go back to Vietnam, I am astounded at how much the country has changed. And people are always teaching me things. I tell them, I'm not a restaurateur living in Vietnam. I'm not going to steal your ideas and open up a competing venue down the street. I bring business cards. I show them my URL and all that. Business cards used to work, but now no one ever has them, right? But now I'm like, look, I am a cookbook author. You can find me. I write cookbooks. I want you to help me tell the story of Vietnamese food. And they do. And they'll tell me things that are going on within their sphere, within their neighborhood. And then I realized it is moving much faster than what we see here in the United States. And that nostalgia, there's nothing wrong with preserving old foodways, because I think that people, when we first learn about food, we're like, oh, you know what, we really want to honor our heritage. There's nothing wrong with that, because once that you learn about the past, then you can move forward. Right? And I did a lot of that in my first book, but at the same time, I was like, there's nothing the same. You can't cook the way that, my mom can't cook the way she cooked in Vietnam because it just doesn't exist anymore. But do you think you're saying like it's nostalgic in the sense that we make the same foods over and over again?
I think so, but I also wonder, sometimes there's a rose-colored glasses look at the food, and a lot of immigrants, not just Vietnamese ones, will make the most celebratory versions, right? Because they're in the United States, they can buy cheap meat, and which is, a huge status thing in the home country, a lot of different, home countries. And so it colors your memory. Because I've heard so many times, I was a vegetarian for several years in high school, really pissed off my mom, that, Vietnamese people don't eat like that, right? Or like vegetarian means like you can't see the meat,
Right, it's hidden. But okay, no, I totally, the whole thing with the cheap meat, it's like it even rhymes. I'm sure some of you can like write a rap or something with it, the cheap meat rap. But there is like this thing about cheap meat. We come to the United States, and all of a sudden my mom says to me, in retrospect, she goes, there is so much meat here. And I remember the first time I went to the grocery store in America in 1975, I walked down the meat aisle and I poked at every single package that I could touch. Because I was like, this is meat that I can, it's not like just sitting at the wet market. I was like, wow, this is so incredible. And all of a sudden, she talks to me now and she says, the way that we ate in Vietnam was always low meat. So there was like 8 people in our household, and if there was a stir fry, she would buy 300 grams, which is about 10 ounces, which is about the size of a smallish steak for 8 people. That's not much. And she said, because it was really expensive back then. And also, you just didn't have that much meat. But here, it's like, loaded on, baby. And then when we go to restaurants, all those dishes that you see, they're celebration dishes, right? And they're meat heavy. So then all of a sudden, these diasporic cuisines are filtered through the lens of plenitude instead of really what people are cooking and eating traditionally.
Do you see that in other food writers' work about Vietnamese food, for instance? Like when people are making recipes for Vietnamese dishes, do you see the portioning of the meat more reflective of like an English-speaking audience's preference?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the amount of pork belly, it's that you see, you're like, whoa, that is a lot of pork belly. And in Vietnam, they're like cut into these teeny little pieces. People have like those kiwi knives, right? And they're very disposable, they're very sharp knives, and they're very inexpensive. And they like take these pork belly and they cut it into small pieces. And I have to tell you, I'm the youngest of 5 kids. And when my 4 siblings had gone off to college, my mom and dad and I were home, and my parents would start cooking these very low-meat meals, just for the 3 of us. And I was like, what's up with that? And one of the dishes was this pork belly, the pork like simmered with daikon. And it was so good. And my mom never made that for like the first, 12 years that we lived in the United States. And then all of a sudden, like, there it was. And I reminded her of that, and there's a recipe in the book where I cook up pork belly with daikon. And when the book came out, I said, man, I call her Mom. I said, look, remember that dish that you made when I was in high school? And she was like, what? And I was like, yeah, you put daikon in there with the pork, and the daikon absorbed the flavors at the caramel sauce and the fish sauce, and it was so good. Or I say to her, do you remember that eggplant dish that you made with the turmeric and the tomato? I put that in the book too. And that was like no meat book recipe. And she said, those are foods that were really, for her, nostalgic food, but they're not foods that we associate with Vietnamese food. And so, honestly, a 7th book, I've written a lot about like the iconic dishes, but this is my way to just like really give them a little spin and kind of returning back to that thing of like, well, this is more like what Vietnamese food traditions are based on. It's very weird. I mean, it's like the funny loop, right? And I know it's like pushing things, but it is like plant-based.
Right. At the top of the convo, I said, we're in this moment, this trend. A book called Vegan Barbecue is coming out really soon, for instance, and like I think Vegetable Revelations by
Yes,
Steven Satterfield's
yes.
coming out. And so it has that newness, that
Yeah.
feeling of newness. In San Francisco, there's a bunch of plant-based restaurants. They don't call themselves vegan, they're plant-based, to avoid the, stigma. But you're saying it's not new.
It's not new. I mean, like, okay, let's take our friend young jackfruit. Okay. young jackfruit like gained all this popularity among vegans, right? As for pulled pork, and I was like, young jackfruit, how come like you've like made appearances in Southern style pulled pork barbecue, but like no one's done like any kind of Asian? And then I like went to my mom. I'm like, Mom, what's with the young jackfruit? She goes, we eat every single part except for the rind in the jackfruit. And then she starts attacking a piece of jackfruit and showing me what to do with like the seeds and then the frilly parts that hold the actual fruit. And she said, we eat everything because it's such it's a fruit that you can use in so many different ways. And then and also the wood can be used for building materials. And I was like, so what do people do with young jackfruit? And she goes, oh, well, you can like cook it with meat and simmer it with like caramel sauce. And then I was like, well, how come there isn't more Vietnamese stuff done with jackfruit in more traditional terms? So like in the book, I play with it. So there's like a salad. There's a green jackfruit salad that I absolutely love. It's very simple to make with canned cracked jackfruit. You don't have to be a mother. No one needs to be my mother and do that sort of stuff. And there's also like a chashu pulled jackfruit that then you can like make that chashu and put it into a baked bao. And I was like, baked bao with chashu filled jackfruit? I'm like happy. And so it's like, it's taking this ingredient that has gotten very popular in like the zeitgeist of Western veganism and then taking it back and saying, we own some of that too. Asians do, and this is like a modern way to present it. And so in that sense, this book has a certain level of agency for me as a cookbook author to just say, we talk about all of this healthy eating, but honestly, it's like framed in such a Western lens, and that we eat healthily too, and within the Asian community, we have a lot of health issues with diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And I'm not a health expert, but I'm like, but I think that if we all like eat just a little bit of less meat, take care of ourselves a little bit more, we're going to be better for it.
Yeah, and why does that agency matter to you?
Because if I don't say it, who will? And if you don't make that food, who will for you? I feel like we hand off so much of our food to corporations, to restaurants, and I like restaurants. Okay, I love some of my best friends are chefs, but the thing is that home cooking is rules, man, because you can control your own flavors, and you can also explore and be very creative. I just came home from New York, and people there, they've got the book and they're cooking with it, and I know how hard that is because like they have tiny kitchens. But there is this other agency in the book, and that has to do with tofu. So I've like seen a lot of vegetarian books come out recently that use alt meat products. I'm not into it, man. Because like for Asian food, all those alt meat products, there's like for beef, which is like great if you're like into hamburgers and meatballs and stuff. But Asian food is like based on pork. And also those alt meat products are formulated for certain dishes. Again, hamburgers, meatballs. And so they're not formulated really for to be adapted for Asian dishes. And so I was like, forget that, and they're expensive and they're overly processed. I'm just gonna go back to my friend tofu. Little tofu's been around for 2,000 years. and it's affordable and it's manipulable, and so there's like all this cool stuff that I do with tofu in there, like make these umami tofu crumbles that look like ground pork, and you're just using like regular, ingredients from the supermarket. Same thing with like MSG. I just like come out of the closet on it. I'm down with it. I mean, it's like, I don't, yes, chefs are coming out, with like stuff, it's like MSG is okay. But I think that for me as a cookbook writer, and I'm a professional home cook, I'm not a restaurant chef, I want to liberate you and I want to liberate myself to use some of these ingredients and use them in a way that I think is like really cool and fun.
So, okay, I want to hear more about your adaptations then. You talked about tofu, but tofu isn't, most people wouldn't think of tofu as a surprising addition to a plant-based diet. But are there things in tofu that we don't largely recognize or know enough about?
Well, first, there's fermented tofu. I mean, a lot of times people think to themselves, oh, I know tofu, comes in a tub, it's bland, it's white. But it also comes, and I have to press it all the time. It's like, no, there's like so many different kinds of tofu. There's tofu skin sticks that look like nunchucks that are chewy and nutty, and they're great for mimicking like the chewy cuts of pho or bún bò Huế noodle soups. There's fermented tofu, which I'm like trying to push, that I push in the book. Fermented tofu is something that's very popular in Southeast Asian and Southern Chinese cooking, and it's called jiao in Vietnamese. And when I was writing the book, I thought, oh man, I'm going to push jiao. And what if people just like freak out? Because when I was growing up, I don't know, was your mother this way about jiao? Did you guys eat jiao?
No. I've actually never had it at home.
My mother was so afraid of it because it comes in this jar and they're like these cubes and they can look a little funny, like potentially harmful. Because they're weird. I mean, they're like sitting on the shelf. They're shelf stable because they're preserved in a brine that's very salty, or there's like oil and wine in it. But when I wrote my tofu book, I got to travel to Taiwan and I ate a lot of fermented tofu and it was so delicious. And I was like, I cannot write a book that's based upon low meat and vegetables without including fermented tofu. And if it freaks you out, there is a meat alternative or cheese alternative product that's commercially made called jiao. And it's made with using fermented tofu. So you can go to Whole Foods and it's like there, stealthily. But you can also buy it and use it as a seasoning for really cool dishes, stir frying with greens like water spinach, but also making this cool dip that then like you can put crudités in there or put on like grilled romaine and get all fancy and chef it up. And I love that ingredient, and I hope that people, that's like next level tofu for me.
Yeah, and I think actually one of my favorite recipes in the book, which I think is such a treat to look at, is the vegan fish sauce.
Oh, yes.
It is one of the most, I don't know, it's so difficult because there are products out there made for Vietnamese Buddhists that are like pineapple based and add a little bit of umami and salt, but this version, which uses kombu, right, and layers a lot of different savory elements to mimic fish sauce, is such a masterpiece.
Thank you. Well, Soleil got to review an early version of the book, and she's like, that vegan fish sauce is like worth the admission price. She's quoted in the book, so I may be misquoting her. But that was like the first thing that I dealt with, because I was like, people are going to say to me, what are you going to do about Nuoc Mam? And what was I going to do about Nuoc Mam? That's like because there are commercial products that are sold at like Whole Foods that just are not very flavorful. And disappointingly, flavorful and expensive.
It's kind of like the LaCroix of like fish sauce.
Right.
You know, it's like there was a fish in another room and someone's saying the name of the fish, and that's how much flavor is in there.
It's like, it's so mild. You take a look at like the sodium count, you're like, oh, that's sad. And I was like looking for a one-to-one swap, right? And there are these products that are coming out of Vietnam that are sold only really at hardcore little Saigon markets. And I tried them all, and the ones that I liked the most had a little pineapple juice in it, and they all had preservatives. And so I thought, okay, am I gonna get over this fish sauce hump, this vegan fish sauce hump? I have to come up with a recipe. So I spent like weeks, probably like a month, buying ingredients like canned pineapple juice and different kinds of seaweed, and I'm combining them to make vegan fish sauce, and it is hilariously fun. Most of it takes about an hour and a half. You know, like most of the time you're just like standing around. You know, you can like text, you can like go off and do something else because you're just waiting for things to hydrate or drain or something, and then you put this thing together. You're like, oh my God, I just made this thing that is a very good version of fish sauce. It has a slightly briny smell and flavor because of the seaweed, and it can be used one-to-one as a swap. I'm very proud of that recipe, and I hope people make it. But it's like a weird thing, right? Because like I thought like media would be like, oh my God, you know, she's got vegan fish sauce, but they really like weren't touching it. I think it's this thing about like
Conspiracy.
Yeah.
Big fish sauce.
I know big fish sauce is gonna come after me. But if you're not, you know, I have the vegan fish sauce at home because I just love playing with it. If you use regular fish sauce, your flavor is going to be excellent in the book too. But I wanted to have that recipe in the book and the option for cooks because cooking is fun and it's creative. And I'm not someone who says it's me or you or us or them. It's not about me, but it's really about we. And so if you're a vegan, you come to my, you know, book, there's a lot there for you. I'm not gonna make fun of you either, you know?
Yeah.
We can all coexist at the table.
Life's hard enough.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think we are open to questions. If anyone has any, our friend over there has the microphone, so feel free to raise your hand and you will be given the opportunity to ask Andrea anything. Literally anything.
Literally. Otherwise, we're going to just keep going. I think there's a question.
Right over here.
Yeah. Thank you. Hello, this was an amazing conversation, and I wanted to ask for some thoughts on how maybe both of you think about authenticity. Like, I loved what you brought up about kind of like diasporic hacks or maybe like homeland hacks for making food that's not like authentic in the old way, but still is authentic to people's experiences maybe or how they're cooking now. So would love to hear more thoughts on that.
Authenticity is slippery. And I think that when you start saying this is authentic or that's not authentic, you know, in Vietnamese we have this term không đúng, which means like you're not right. And it's an insult that if they say to you, không đúng, it's always like this wagging finger business, right? That they are insulting not just you, but your parents, your ancestors going back many generations. And then all of a sudden you're like running, ducking for cover. And oftentimes like your own people can be the worst to you because they're like telling you what's wrong and what's right. For me, authenticity though, it is really about intention. And I think about, you know, what's wrong and what's right in terms of what actually works in the kitchen and what actually works for people's flavors. Does it taste good? Does it make sense? What was the root of that? You know, I'm always asking chefs like, do you base that on something? I'll go to Vietnam and someone will show me something. I'm like, so what's that based on? What did you see that as? Because I want them to help me understand it too. And sometimes they're like, I don't know. And I'm okay with that. Or sometimes they're like, my mother always made it that way, or my village makes it that way. You go back to Phuoc Island. Did you get this when you went, when you see some kind of herb and you say, what is that? And they go, rau rung, which means jungle herb. And I'm like, and there are 5 different kinds of jungle herb, and they're just called that, and they don't know, and that's okay. So that's authentic, you know? So like, how far do you go? And so authenticity to me also, you know, it's about being honest, is what I'm saying, and about cooking with intention. In Vietnamese, we have this term called kheo, Kheo, and that's about really being thoughtful and being mindful of how you put flavors together, and really having a through line. You guys all know, Soleil, when you eat like a weird dish, like, you know when it's bad.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think recipes and dishes are arguments. There are good arguments and there are bad arguments, right? And what makes them bad is that they're not supported by logic or any sort of emotional weight. And I think recipes are the same way. You know, authenticity comes from thoughtfulness, and actually, if you have good reasons for making decisions that you make, then that's authentic to you, right? In your family situation, and yeah. So they're so contextual. You know, every dish is contextual. It means something to someone, and that doesn't mean, you know, just because it doesn't mean the same thing to me doesn't mean it's less interesting.
Yeah, or have less value
Right.
to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. So I had a question about, as a cookbook author, you kind of have to think about the constraints of what people have access to at the grocery store. And obviously, like cooking in Vietnam, you have access to all of these fresh herbs and veggies that we might not have here, and that's like a huge part of, you know, what makes Vietnamese cuisine so like vegetable forward. So how do you kind of account for that for like the American cook who has maybe access only to like an American grocery store and you know, not those you know, varied ingredients
Right.
in making like a plant forward meal?
Sure. Amazingly so. One thinks, you know, when we approach a cuisine that is not like the dominant cuisine of where we're living, so quote unquote American cuisine, we think, oh my gosh, you know, how do I make that authentic food without all of the authentic ingredients? Well, the wonderful thing is that when you dial things back, when you take a look at the, for example, the herbs that are enjoyed in Vietnam, there's a lot of cilantro and mint. And when my family came here in 1975, we went to an American grocery store and we're like, oh, there's cilantro and mint and lettuce. We're gonna be all right. It's like, we can be Vietnamese in America, you know? But thankfully, living in the Bay Area and living in California, we have access to so many different herbs. And so, like, for all of you who have the tote bag, for example, thank you. So so that's a tote bag that I've been wanting to make for a very long time, because like shopping for Asian Vietnamese herbs can be really difficult because there's like no standardized English term for things. So you gotta like learn to read Vietnamese, and you're Vietnamese, maybe you're kind of rusty. And so, you know, you can use the bag as a guide, and it's also very handsome. The artwork is done by a young Singaporean woman in Oakland. And so the herbs, those are all available at different times of the year here in California. And I always have substitutions for people in my recipes. You know, if you don't have Vietnamese coriander, rau ram, you can use cilantro or you can use mint. So there are all of those substitutions because my family had to make a lot of, not compromises, but just make do cooking. That's what, you know, immigrant diasporic cooking's all about over the years. And it's fine, you know, it's gonna be okay. And when you get the right herbs, they're gonna sing. One of the things, you know, is la lot wild pepper leaf. And it's one that it can be found soon, if not already, at Asian markets. And if you don't have it, you can substitute like a shiso leaf. And if you don't have a leaf, you can just like use the filling for the lalo beef rolls and just make a little patty. You're good. And so, and a lot of the other vegetables are really like very common in American cooking, you know, and it's fine. And one of the funny things is, you know, like, do you notice how tomatoes in Vietnam are like rock hard? They're not like ripe and juicy. They're like green and yellow and like hard. So like all the crappy tomatoes that you see, they're perfect for Vietnamese cooking. In Vietnamese, we call them cà chua, so sour eggplants. Because we like that to introduce that tart ingredient into our food.
Yeah, they hold up better to cooking anyway.
They do. So there are like sometimes compromises in there, you know, but I play with things. So like if you don't have water spinach for a stir fry, you use regular spinach, you can use chard, you use all kinds of things. But honestly, y'all, like food has changed so much over the nearly 50 years that my family's been here in the United States. Thank God that you can buy fish sauce at a regular supermarket and that people can order things online. Huge change. You can Wii yourself, you know, like Wii grocery store. They deliver. They deliver like Vietnamese herbs.
I thought you were saying something different.
Oh, I know.
But it's so, the grocery stores are so great, you'll pee yourself,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, you can go pee yourself. You can go wee yourself. Yeah. And sometimes you may. I don't know. It's like so exciting. This is not being recorded, right? I got Soleil all red.
Any other questions?
Hi, this is related to the authenticity question. There's a lot of talk about cultural appropriation of foods, and I'd like to hear what your thoughts are around that, because does it mean that, I think the question is, right, only Asians can cook Asian food, so does that mean within all of our individual diasporas within the Asian community, is somebody Japanese only going to cook Japanese? What about somebody who's not? And, you know, I think hearing you speak about the kind of the adjustments that are made from the home country to here, how is that any different than, say, somebody who's not Asian cooking and perhaps trying to make a living off of, and I think maybe that's the crux of it, making a living off of recipes or a restaurant that maybe is inspired from Asian cuisines and tries to claim, I guess, an authenticity. Am I making sense in that, what I'm asking here? It's complicated.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've written, God, so many essays on cultural appropriation in food. So that's kind of where I'm speaking to. And I think you've got it on the head, too. One, it's about money. Two, it's about the idea that those swaps improve upon a dish, right? Improve upon an idea. There's a level of like intellectual ownership and cultural ownership that is assumed in that act. And that's really the problem. It's not really, I mean, to me, it's really never been about like, you're the wrong person to cook this thing, because I think Andrea would agree that everyone should cook her recipes. Otherwise, she wouldn't sell any books.
Right. I have a mortgage in Northern California.
Yeah, but no, it's a great question for sure, and I think probably a lot of people have felt some pause, right, in changing things and adapting recipes to their own preferences.
Yeah, no, this is something that's so fascinating to me because I think about cultural appropriation on so many different levels. I think about it in terms of, you know, Soleil's work and her positions on it, a lot of positions about who can cook what to sell to whom. In my sensibility about it is that in Vietnamese history, there's been a lot of cultural appropriation in the sense that we were people who had a lot of contact with foreigners who didn't treat us so well. And, but for cultural survivability, we would take their best ideas and we would turn them around, flip them, for example, with banh mi, and turn them around and make this sandwich that is our own, taking ideas that the French brought, putting it together, just ideas the Chinese brought. Chilies came from the Portuguese, right? And putting it together with pate, mayonnaise, Maggi seasoning sauce, all that stuff, all those foreign ideas into one sandwich that we say, this is the Vietnamese sandwich. We own it. So appropriation for me goes different directions. And the other thing that's fascinating to me is in Vietnam, when a Westerner comes in, a Western chef, and there are a lot of those now in Vietnam, they come and they start serving Vietnamese food or preparing Vietnamese food in Vietnam. That is like a very interesting thing, right? What's your take on that, Soleil?
I think it just it makes the place like it's kind of like Taco Bell in Mexico, you know. You're just like, oh, this is funny, and then you go and you're like, oh, cute, you know. And you know, obviously Taco Bell in like Mexico and like Guatemala, they're like more nightclubs than taquerias, which is great. It's like a different thing. It's just different. It's just different. It's funny. It's fun.
It's funny. It's very interesting. And there's an aspect of Vietnamese culture where people say, oh, the foreign person appreciates my food in my territory, and that what a novelty. Finally, I get some respect. And I mean, there's like there have been examples of like French chefs in Hanoi who like go and there's a person named Didier Corlew who is like very authentic, but he does like very modern takes on Vietnamese food. He's married into a very knowledgeable Hanoi family. And I thought that was just beautiful, this marriage of French and Vietnamese ideas. But I know that, and the thing that really bugged me, I gotta tell you, I've never said this publicly, because I was like, so the Vietnamese people let him rep them with regard to pho. I was like, people, why do you need like a foreign person talking about your food? And it really, really bothered me for a number of years. And when I wrote the pho cookbook, I really wanted to get the Vietnamese perspective in there. So I spent like, oh my God, a month translating like a 6-page essay, okay? My Vietnamese is not very good. But I was just like, I want the Vietnamese perspective, and that essay was written by a Vietnamese person. I went back to Vietnam and I interviewed people about pho. I did not want Didier Corlew's perspective or the idea that pho came from poto pho, which plenty of Vietnamese people have bought into as well. To create like this whole narrative, like this rosy glasses colonial narrative about Vietnamese food that's like so beautiful. Because it was hard.
Right, because a lot of times too, people kind of, especially food writers, just say, oh, and then the French gave the Vietnamese a baguette, and they took it, and it was great.
Yeah. And no one questioned the fact that how the hell did they manage to make baguette in a humid country consistently? I mean, that is a huge, huge skill. And no one ever like gives props to the Vietnamese for doing that. And a lot of the bakers were Vietnamese Chinese too. I mean, there's like so many layers that I could dial down, and hopefully I will be able to do it in my lifetime. But so, with cultural appropriation, there's so many levels that I think about it. And that's one of the things that is funny to me.
On the other hand, yeah, it is very funny. Like sometimes it's like when I was in Vietnam recently, they sell these like little souvenir magnets with food, like goi kun and pho. And there are these magnets, they're kind of styrofoamy or foamy, of bun cha, this noodle dish with like pork patties that's popular in Hanoi. And in the corner of the magnet, it was about 2-3 inches wide. There was like a small like brown face. And I was like, what is that? What is this face? And then the vendor was like, oh, that's Obama.
Oh my God. They
I
put
was like,
Obama
what?
on a bunjab magnet?
Yeah, he's like part of the lore now because he went to a restaurant that served that on his visit to Vietnam with Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah.
Now he's on all the magnets. So like Vietnamese people love that too, though.
Yeah, they do. Because they're like, hey, you know what? I'm going to sell this. I'm going to use Obama. I'm going to sell my bunjia, the Obama cha, something like that. They're entrepreneurial people. So I think that I take a look at it, and I also try to take it seriously, but not too seriously.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? We have 5 minutes, so probably 1 or 2 more.
Hi, thanks. So I'm lucky that I have half my family is Buddhist, and so I've been introduced to a lot of really amazing things, like what Vietnamese people can do with tofu, tau, and my mom has also been like making bae with like glass noodles and like these carrot things. So it's really interesting to see, and with of course technology and YouTube and sharing all these cultures. So in your research, what are some of like these other things happening in the homeland in Vietnam that you find really innovative and different that is you've inspired your cookbook?
So let's go back to the rice paper. So there are these doing things with rice paper that you never thought of. You can grill it. So I remember walking in Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, and I kept walking up and down the same street near where I was staying, and every day I saw this woman squatting at a brazier, like grilling rice paper and like putting toppings on it, serving it almost like a pizza thing. And it's called bancang nướng, so grilled rice paper. And I thought, oh my God, that sounds so good. And then I saw it again in Da Nang. And one afternoon I sat down and again got the woman to tell me what she did and all that. And it was like, it's almost like a stoner kind of dish, but it's sold to like school kids after school. And there's like scallion oil on it and a little quail egg, and then she put like shoestring potatoes, and then she drizzled a little beef jerky like seasoning sauce on
They
it.
put Laughing Cow on it too, right?
Yeah, sometimes Laughing Cow too, sometimes hot dogs. I mean, there's like this whole thing, and there's like all of this stuff, and also there's like this other thing that's in the banh mi possibilities chapter that is not just about the sandwich, but also different things you can do with the bread. There is this crunchy like garlic bread that Vietnamese people are making in Vietnam, where they take spent baguettes and they take a rolling pin and they roll it really flat, and then they like spread things on it, including scallion oil or green onion oil, and then sometimes they'll put Laughing Cow cheese on it, sometimes hot dogs. You see like a trend here, and Kewpie mayonnaise has taken over, and chili sauce. And it is like food driven by young people too, and so many different manipulations of ingredients that we don't know about yet in the United States. You can find it in certain places, those dishes, but still not as much, because by and large people want the classics. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, when I was in Vietnam, I went to a banh mi vendor, and she had an air fryer.
Yes.
Yes. Pretty sick. She was refreshing the baguettes in the air fryer, which was like
Totally.
blew my mind.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Forget the brazier now. It's the air fryer and the microwave. No one has space for like a regular oven in their homes, in their kitchens.
I think that's it for us. Next is the signing and the meet and greet, where you can all just tell her how much you love her. But thank you so much for listening to us talk.
Thank you. One thing I want for you all to know is that so anyone who like buys a book between now and the 17th, you have them in your hand. Like my publisher and I have like this cool Zoom class that I'm going to do on the 18th of May, and you can check my Instagram account and sign up for it, or you can check my Substack, Pasta Fish Sauce for it, and it's really cool because I'm going to give like a whole lowdown on rice paper, which is a tricky ingredient. And so anyway, you can also just like ping me with questions and post pictures of what you make, because I love to see what people do with my recipes, because it's exciting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.